Functions are block of codes designed to perform a specific job. Now, for the most part, we have tried to write codes repeatedly. And we write codes repeatedly for us to do what we want to do. But consider a scenario where we have to write a block of code so that we can call on it anytime we want. Welcome to this lesson where we'll be taking on Python function. The interesting thing about the Python function is that you can box in something I always call a black box, all manner of codes, be it lists, functions, be it lists, while loops, for loops inside the block, and let that be the one-stop shop for a specific job. When you want to perform this specific job, you simply do what is called a function call. Again, you would not need to type all the codes. You simply call the function and the dedicated task happens. Functions make programs easier to write, easier to read, test, and fix. And without further ado, let us start up by writing a simple function. So we're back to our Jupyter Notebook. Formerly, we used our Google Colaboratory. So we're back here. Again, the idea is to let you know that you can use different IDEs to write code and they function properly. So we'll write a simple function. Now, consider a scenario where you would like to send greetings to people. Normally, you will decide if you want to send a greeting, you create a variable and call it greetings. And inside you say, hello, Sam. And you put it. So that means at any point you feel you want to say hi to Sam, you say twins, open brackets, and simply print greetings. And here you go, hello Sam. But this is not efficient because at every point in your code base, this has to be repeated. Now consider a scenario where you have a situation where you simply put a code that does this, but you don't even have to write that code again, you just simply have to call it. So a simple function will suffice. Now, function starts with the first thing called def, which is a keyword. The def informs the Python interpreter that you are about to create a function. It is followed by the function name. And here I'll try to be intuitive with it. I'll call it salute underscore people. And then it ends with a bracket. Now, inside that bracket, some things are supposed to be inside. And whatever is supposed to be inside is called a parameter. But we're not going to deal with a parameter right now. We're just going to simply create a simple function. Now, I'm going to also introduce something that I haven't introduced before, just like in the past lessons where I introduced the addition, equal to operator. I'm going to introduce something called a docstring. A docstring is an elder relative to the comment. Docstrings give functions a label. So if you read through a function, you get to see what it is supposed to do. So here, docstring comes in 3 quotes, right? So here I will just call this salutation. Salutation function. I'll call this a salutation function. Break in here, salutation function. Now I go and what will be inside the code, which is already a block because we have already seen that there is a colon there. I write print, inside I just write hello. Now we have created that. So now every time we feel like we want to say hello to anyone, we simply do a function call, and that is what a function call looks like here. I call it a function call. And then I say salute people with the bracket. And once I do that, it returns hello. Now, this is basically simple. We have a keyword, def keyword, then we also have a function name ending with a bracket. We introduce what a docstring looks like, right? And docstring simply just tells us what the code or what the function does, and then of course the actual code, line of code that is inside the block. Now, which is really cool. Now, how about we pass a certain information into a function? And now to do that, we would introduce two interesting things, arguments and parameters. So put that as a comment, arguments and parameters. A parameter defines what you can put inside your function call. Again, here again I come and I paste the same function that we have created, the function called salute underscore people, and I come and create a parameter inside. Now what this means is that the next time I call the salute people function, I am supposed to provide a parameter. So again here I come, and then when I put it, I have to now make it really intuitive. I introduce the F string here, and this time around whatever is there, we would want that to be, we'll say the name and whatever name that will be introduced. Depending on how we write it, we try to put the title so that if it's put in lower cases, it reflects what we're working with. So this is now putting a parameter inside our function, or a parameter inside of our function call, or rather the function name, and then this time it's different. Now what that means is if I now have to call salute people, I will have to introduce an argument, and this time around I will have to introduce a name. So here I put Samuel here, so when I call it, I see that we now have hello Samuel. So what have we done? We have introduced a simple function, and the simple function was with a defined keyword, the function name, but the function name didn't have a parameter. But we went ahead to do a function call. Now we also introduce passing arguments or passing information into a function, and that information inside the function is known as a parameter. Now once you pass that parameter into a function, when you are now calling the function, which is also called an argument, you have to pass a parameter into that argument, and we did that. Again, function definitions can have multiple parameters and multiple arguments. It all depends on the type of function you create. Also, there are positional parameters and also positional arguments. That means if you have a parameter, based on how you set it up when putting up the function name, it has to be reflected when you are making an argument call, or making a function argument, or passing a function argument. Now, these things are part of the things that make a function really interesting. For instance, let us look at a situation called positional argument. Here, I am going to introduce another function. We'll call this positional argument. Now, what are we going to do here? I'm going to talk about our profile situation. I'm going to use the def keyword, and then I want to describe profile. So I call it desk profile. Now, of course, this is a function name, and inside of it, I'm going to introduce two parameters. I'll call the first one profile type, underscore type, and then I'll call the next one job underscore name. Intuitively, it tells you we're looking at the profile of jobs. Again, we put a full colon so we can have a block of code, which is now the block that will actually be called by Python when the Python is interpreting, when the Python interpreter is interpreting the function itself. Here we would print we try to make it really intuitive again. So here we would print I am, and whatever is in the profile type is what we'll put here. So we'll open this and we'll put profile type. So we'll come over here and choose the profile type. Then we have this closed. Right. Then the next thing we'll also print the next thing we want to also print the job name. So how do we work with that then? We want to print the job name. And, yes, so we use f-string again. Try to ensure that it is readable, and then here I put here the job name, and then go ahead to write this what I do. I hope this works. Right. So we'll run this. Now we are going to have to call the function, and obviously we're going to have the parameters inside of them. Right, so now I'm going to call desk profile. Oh, I forgot this part. Let us also introduce a docstring. And so we'll call this description of work profile. So we'll run this. Now I also want us to look at this. If I put this, then come in between and just do shift and tab in between this place, you can now see the docstring telling us description of our function. You can see what it does there. When you put the cursor in between the brackets and simply hit shift and tab on your keyboard, it will show you the description of the profile. Also, I want you to know that there's a fundamental difference between a docstring and a comment. Again, for sake of understanding, I'm going to put a comment here, and I'll call this comment description. And again, once I run this and I come here again to see what is inside our function, you will notice that the comment did not show up. So that tells you the fundamental difference between a docstring and a comment. Here, as we proceed to do our function call and also use our arguments based on the parameters we have created, we have two here. So we're going to look at the positional arguments. The first thing we're going to put in is here we will put in engineer, and here we put in a software developer. And so when you call this, you see that I am an engineer, software developer, or we could say software development. Yeah, that will make a lot of sense here. Software development. So software development is what I do. So right, so you can see how the positional arguments work, right? And this is pretty interesting when you're working with functions. Another thing we could talk about is keyword arguments. Sometimes we would want to ensure that our keyword argument follows the exact parameter we're looking for. So here we're going to talk about keyword arguments. So here I'll come again to this place, and when I want to call on these two things here, I want to call on this. This time I'm going to make changes to what is here. Let me put a data practitioner, and then here I want to put a data scientist. And I also want you to see that as I put this here, I can decide that I want to have the keywords slated right side them. So the first thing I'll try to do is come here and say profile type. And if I put profile type, you can see that there is an assignment operator close to it, and here I can put the job name. You can see that it is. So with this keyword arguments, we can specifically state what we actually want. And so we run this. Oh, you can see that I am a data practitioner. That doesn't look good for readability. Okay, so what I will do is I'll go back here and I put a/and for that makes it look good. So in case we put this here, so we have this. I am a data practitioner, data scientist. Again, I'm supposed to write data science. This can be really tricky, but I hope we just get the whole idea. So data science is what I do. So again, you can see how we try to introduce a few things. We tried as much as we can to introduce a simple function and try to see how using a function works. We passed information into a function which are parameters, and then we try to understand the arguments and parameters make up the function call. The parameters are introduced in the function name to ensure that it is replicated when you make an argument call. Right. And we also talked about keyword arguments and positional arguments, just for us to understand the fundamental aspects of how a function works. In our next lesson, we will try as much as we can, just like we have done in other aspects of this course, to look at a few things about functions. In the functions we've written, we did not put in a return value. In the next lesson, we're going to look at that. And we can also play around with a few things. Can we work with while loops in functions? Do we have lists in functions? We'll try this out so that we can have a fair enough understanding of what a function looks like. Again, I would advise you, if you did not get it the first time you watched it, I'll advise you to watch it again. And with patience and understanding, I promise you, you will understand this part of the lesson. We are going to try to be intelligent with a few things. I'm going to introduce one, return values in our function. In the past functions we have written, we have used print statements, but print statements are not always going to be used in functions. Second, we are going to talk about lists in functions, and finally we are going to look at what it looks like to have random number of arguments in a function. Of course, I'm also going to share the error that happens when, the very popular error that happens when you're calling an argument or making an argument call or a function call, and then that will be the end of our function lesson. So now we have written functions earlier on, and these functions have had print statements. If we go to our notebooks, I'll just simply go back to the previous code we've written here, and then I'll copy this code. Now, if you look at the code we're going to copy, you're going to see basically that this code uses the return or the print statement. Now we are going to copy it here, and as usual we are going to try as much as we can to now look at something different. Now you can see that we have print statements over here. Now imagine a situation where we would not have to use this anymore. So what do I do? What I'm going to do here is I'm going to gray out these two print statements, and then at this time I am going to simply rewrite the code. Now the code we're going to be writing now is we would want the function to return one line of code or something or a task that we are looking forward to using as the job we are writing the code for. So here I'm going to introduce profile, right? And in here I am going to write an f string. Now remember, the initial function returns a description of profile, because if I scroll up, you can see the description of the profile for which it returns, but this time around we're not going to use the print statement. So here I'm going to define the return of the statement in itself. So here I'm going to write I am a, and then of course we're going to have the profile we're trying to return, right? So here we will introduce our curly brackets, and inside of it, as usual, we will put the profile type inside, which is the profile type is what we are trying to call, which is one of the parameters. Then I'll introduce and again put job name, which is again one of the parameters we were working with, and I'll write is what I do, and we'll close that. Now again with this, we just simply return profile. That's how simple the return profile is, or the return statement is. So here we are. So we run this. Now once we run this, again we do describe profile, which is our function that takes in two arguments, or takes in two parameters. So we're about to make the argument call, and then I'll basically state what I want, which is simple. I put here a data practitioner, and the next one is data science. And so again, if we call this, you now see that what we have here is I am a/and a data practitioner, and data science is what I do, which is just the same thing if you scroll back up here, but this place we used the print statement. So the return value is something you're going to be seeing when you read other people's codes. Always remember, for the most part, you'll be reading other people's codes or other codes that have been written rather than the ones you write. So you're going to see a lot of return statements or return functions in codes. The second part we're going to be looking at is lists in functions. Now, sometimes you have a code you have written, and again, you would want a situation where you probably want these tasks to happen for different function calls, and you don't want a situation where you want to make a call and do it much more often. Now we're going to introduce a list to this, and we're going to try to be intelligent with it. Again, let me look back at a few codes we've written and see if we can jump on something. All right, so let me pick up this again. We have written this earlier on when we were talking about arguments and parameters. This time around, I'm going to take it here and try to be smart with it. So here, what we're trying to do is introduce a list. So here we call it lists in functions. So now I'm going to try to do something different. So now we have name here, and of course this is salutation function. Of course you see what this is, And of course, here we would want a situation where we can call on a few things to happen. So I'm thinking, how about we say for, let me make this name. So now I'm introducing the for loop inside of a function. So I say for name in names, right? Then I'll introduce something called a message. So this message is supposed to be the salutation that will be given whoever is called upon, or whoever the function that salutes people gets to do the salutation, which is basically the specific job which it has been written to do. Now, here I'm going to write this, and right, I'm going to write. And as usual, I'm going to introduce the curly brace with the f string, which makes us call our name, right? And so that's what we're going to have here. And then, okay, I'll add a title to it so that in case names are written regardless of uppercase and lowercase, and that will make some sense. So now that we have that, we already have the message we're going to call, so we could simply remove this code that is here. And again, we can simply write print message or return message. So you now see how the return function is used. So we can simply write return message. I'm wondering why that is the case. Return message. Seems to be some form of error here, but I'm about to find out why I have not, because it's red, so that means there's something wrong. What is wrong? Oh yes, I see it. We have not closed this. Yes, so that was the problem we had. Right, so now we have created a function, and now you can see that the function is supposed to return a hello to a certain name, right? Now, how are we going to do that? Now, we're going to look at the salutation we're going to do. So that means we're doing a function call where we'll call the function name. Now, remember that we would like a situation where if we are doing this, we would want to show that there is a list for which we are trying to work with, right? Now, if this is done, we are going to have like a bunch of profiles for people we want to talk with, or we want to send this salutation to. Now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create something called profile, not something, but actually a list called profile. Now, inside the profile, I'm going to have 3 profiles that I would like to send messages out to. So we're going to have them written out. Then here we are. And then finally, so we want to send shout outs to Senior Man, Soft Boy, and Chairman. Right. Now you now see that we now have a list. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to call salute, and then inside salute, we're going to put the list inside. So you can see if we run this, oh, why do we have a problem? Apparently, it did not actually bring out what we're looking for. So let me see what could have been the problem. Oh, I see what the problem is. This is profiles. So we have profiles here. So once we call this, it is supposed to fill everybody here, but apparently it is only doing that. So I'm trying to wonder where we have an error. So, okay, should we do this? Let's see where our problem is. Yes. So here we ought to have returned a print statement because it was going to follow up in a line of the lists or elements that are inside. So here we created the salute people function, and normally what it is supposed to do is salutation. Look at that, it creates salutation for people, which is why we call it the salutation function. Inside of it, we created the for loop, which is for name in name. Then we created a message that in the message is whatever salutation we want to send out to anyone. Now, normally, because we can now call this function for each parameter sent inside the function call, then, or each parameter for the argument we are going to be making, we decided to create a list. Over here you can see profiles, and in the list we have 3 individuals we are trying to send salutations to. And then we called the salute people function with the argument profile, and inside the profile it will go and iterate on each element inside of the list, just like you will do normally when you call a for loop. And in the end, we got 3 salutations to 3 individuals. Again, just like we have been doing, we are trying as much as we can to flesh out a few things we have learned and try to build it into this block of code called a function. Again, remember, a function is a black box that helps us to achieve specific jobs or tasks. And inside the function, you would realize in real time, or whenever you're working, or whenever you're doing any contribution, or where you're trying to abstract real life problems into code, that it is smart to bring in a whole lot of things, right from variables to lists, dictionaries, and what have you. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is arguments. Now, we have been talking about making argument calls. But what happens when you put up a code and you would like to give more than one argument or more than one call to it? What happens to that? Now, that means you look at the parameter, and the parameter has just one parameter inside, but then you provide 2 parameters upon making the call, which is you provided 2 arguments when you're trying to make your keyword arguments. Now, what happens? Again, let us show the errors that can happen and also show how you can mitigate this error. Again, I put a comment, I call this random number of arguments. So now we can again return to the code we had written earlier on. Now, because we have the salute people function, I'm going to use it again. So I call salute people, but this time around, I decide I'm going to salute Samuel and Winger at the same time. Now you realize now that I'm no longer using a list. And when I run that, I get an error. It tells me it takes 1 positional argument, but 2 were given. Now this can happen sometimes when you put more than the required number of parameters. Again, there's going to be a mix-up between parameters and arguments, but the required number of parameters. And parameters are what you find when you create the function. It is inside the bracket when you create the function. So now, how do we deal with this? So what we can do here is that we can introduce something called like a keyword argument, which makes it easier for you to call more than one parameter, even if it is one parameter that has been indicated. So how do we solve for that problem? This is how we do that. So we call this solving for random number of arguments. So what we're going to do here, let's just introduce more cells here. And then again, I'll take this code, because we're going to work on this code again. This time when I come here, I will now introduce an asterisk to it. Now with this asterisk, we have given ourselves a leeway. So now again, I go and I copy this random number of arguments. And I come here, you can see that initially we had an error, and this time around you see that we have made up for that error. Just a simple asterisk here, and that changes what we are working with. So again, so many things can happen. You can again see that we can make up for a whole lot of things that may happen in case you would want whoever is going to be using your function to try as much as possible to make it easier for them to use it by introducing the asterisk. Now sometimes, again, you wouldn't know the kind of parameters that will be passed into it, right? And you want a situation where you would want to pass in a parameter, but these parameters have follow-up information. Say you want somebody to pass in first name and last name. However, this person wants to include possibly their location, possibly their job information and all that. How do you do that? So here I'm going to also write a brand new set of code that makes it even interesting. At the end of it, we are going to see that by creating this situation, you have introduced dictionaries into your function, because we are now going to have a situation where code is written, parameters are called or parameters are imputed, arguments are made, and it returns a dictionary. How does that happen? So again, this is we trying as much as we can to be clever with creating functions. And also, I promise you this is going to be the last for which we're going to talk about. And in this, we would ensure that we bring a few things. We have introduced the return value, we have introduced lists, and now we are introducing ways for us to call make random arguments. Now we're going to make random argument calls here, and at the same time, we're going to put in these arguments we have made into a dictionary. So how does that work? So here we're going to write the code from scratch. So this is functions and dictionaries. So it's going to be returning a dictionary, functions and dictionaries. So record dictionaries, dictionary. So first off, what we're going to do is we're going to define the code here. We're going to call this profile. We're going to call it profile, so which is going to be the name with the function. And so look at the interesting thing. We want to see this profile is going to have 3 parameters. We have first, last, and then we're going to introduce 2 asterisks. Before we had 1 asterisk, now we have 2, and now we have info, right? The full column. And then we try to introduce a docstring. Remember what a docstring is? A docstring tells you what a function can do if you look up the function. Now we would call this what are we going to call it? We're trying to what are we trying to do? We're trying to do what? Lookup. Let's call this lookup profile info. Then, first thing we're going to do is we are going to introduce info, and inside info there's going to be a square bracket. Now you see that it's now beginning to look like key value pairs. So inside of it we're going to call this first underscore name, and first underscore name is going to be given to first. And remember that first is the first parameter we have. Again, we create info, square bracket, just like the key value pairs, and we call this last underscore name. Now, this will be given to last. And finally, we are going to use the return function, and return function will return info. So yes, we have created that. Now what this does is, when we are going to make our function call, the argument we are going to pass into this function, which is profile, the argument we're going to pass into this is going to be more than what we have written up. First, we could pass in first name, call it Samuel. Then we pass in last name, say Yusuf. Then let me even make this look a lot better. Then next, we want to pass in location. So we want to know location. So we put in location. Should we put it in square brackets? No, let's not do that. Let's put it, say location. We'll put this here, and then we'll call location Lekki phase 1. Then we also want to put in job description. So we say job name. Then inside the job name we say production engineer. Is there other things you'd like to add? Probably want to add, what do we want to add again? I'm trying to get this out of my head. Okay, say gender. So we look at the gender here. And inside the gender here, we just put it male. And I think that should be that. So now, normally, what we have created here, we are expecting, normally we would have an error because we would have said, oh, this is beyond the number of parameters. Also, you can see that even if we have 3 parameters inside our function name, we can see that we have now 5 arguments have been passed into the function call. So you're wondering what is going to go on. So we'll run this and we have an error. What's the error? So we run it, and so now you see what we have here. We now have a dictionary. Now we have a dictionary that first shows us the location name, which is Lekki phase 1, job name production engineer, gender male, first and last name. And all of them come in as a dictionary. So which means, remember what the dictionary is. It is a collection, a data structure that is far more associated with real life situations, real life information, real life data collection than any of the other data structures like lists, tuples, and sets. And so here we have a function that gives us a chance to collect information and then putting this information into a dictionary. Going forward, which is when we start off with getting data, reading data, and trying to understand how data works, you'll find out that you can, for the most part, use a dictionary to create a data frame. Again, what is a data frame? Let's be patient. We are going to jump into our data analysis course as we proceed. And in that data analysis course, we're going to do a whole lot. And remember, it is the reason why we are writing functions, it's the reason why we are learning dictionaries, and all this make up the introduction to Python course or lessons that we have been having all through this, what I call it, box of lessons that we have created. Again, I'm thankful that you joined me in going through this journey for introduction to Python. Again, for most of the lessons, I will advise you to take your time, watch it, rewatch it, try as much as possible to recall the things you have done, test out your skill, and test out the examples with newfound examples, with newfound application of abstractions that you'll be looking at from time to time. And as you do this, these skills will stick and remain at your fingertips as you proceed.